So before I tell you this story, I just want to say that I know I was stupid. I should have known better, I messed up, and I learned my lesson. But basically, I live alone in a sort of small house. The neighborhood is very busy and populated, and this is the first house that I've owned. Not too long after buying it, it was the springtime, and I was off of work one day. As I was home inside the house, there was a knock at the door. I walked over and opened it up to see a man standing there. He was wearing a work belt with some tools on it and a sort of dirty sweatshirt and hard hat. He looked to be some kind of construction worker or maybe contractor. He introduced himself to me and said that he worked for the city and had been told to inspect our block. I was young and I believed him. I didn't question his credentials or anything. The man told me that he had walked around my property and felt that my basement was in great danger of flooding. He used some complicated terminology describing stuff that I did not understand. But his main point was that when all the snow was melting and it would rain a lot in the spring, my basement would probably flood. I guess my foundation had cracks in it or something. He asked me if he could come inside the basement and look around. Apparently, if I had some kind of work done, then the house would be safe. I was skeptical because I didn't want to be scammed into getting a bunch of work done to the house that I had just recently bought. The man told me that he was not trying to sell me anything because he would not be doing the actual work. He just wanted to see if my house had already had some kind of work done to it, and it might not need anything. So I reluctantly told him that he could come down into my basement and look. Now, I had a finished basement in the house. I hadn't done too much to it yet, but there was carpet floors and I had a couch in the main room. There was also a bathroom and a spare bedroom that I was maybe going to turn into an office or something. That was just another reason why I was concerned if it might flood. If it had just been some unfinished concrete floor basement, then it wouldn't be quite as big of a deal. We both went downstairs into the basement. He started walking around and talking about the walls and stuff. Then he told me to follow him. He went inside the small room that was like a closet and had the breakers and stuff in it. We went in there and he was going to show me something. Then he told me to wait there and he left the room and closed the door behind him. So then I was shut into the room and I was wondering why. I heard him right outside the door and did not know exactly what he was doing. He told me to wait there and he was going to test something. Then he just walked away. I went over to the door and I tried to open it. However, it would not open. It was like I was locked in there. The door started to open and got maybe an inch, but then it wouldn't go any further. Something was preventing the door from opening. I yelled for the man, asking what was going on. He was gone though. The man had gone back upstairs. I tried to open the door and pushed harder and harder, but I just wasn't strong enough. I was so confused. After yelling some more, I was convinced that the man had intentionally locked me in there. I then got out my phone and called the police. They said that they would come to my address immediately. In the meantime, I continued to try to break out of the small room that I was in. I just couldn't do it though, and I was very confused as to what was going on. A short time later, I heard the front door open and close. I didn't know if it was the cops or the man, but I would say that a few minutes after that, I heard the front door open again, and this time it was the police. They entered the house and came into the basement. Then they were able to get me out of the room. The man had tied some kind of really strong cable around the door handle and then put it around the corner and tied the other end around a pole. He must have had that on his work belt. I went upstairs to see that the man had stolen my wallet, among other things. So he basically locked me in the basement and robbed me, except the man was completely gone. He had left before the police got there. I gave the police all the information that I could and then they left. I'm really hoping that the man was caught, but I never heard anything. I'm still mad at myself for letting him in the house, but I learned my lesson. I babysat once for just a few hours one night, and it was the creepiest thing I've experienced. The baby was 1 year old, and I was friends with his mom and aunt. More of a friend with the aunt, and I was visiting. The mother needed a ride and asked if I could stay to watch her kid while my friend, her sister, drove her to get a few things. I said sure, mainly because she had already put him to bed and it shouldn't be any work at all. This was around 7 p.m. at night. They left, and about 15 minutes later, I heard a thump from the bedroom area. All the bedrooms in that house were near each other in the same hallway, and my friend had her cat locked in her room because I have allergies to the cat. Anyways, I just assumed that it was the cat making noise, and I continued to watch TV in the living room. Then 5 more minutes went by and I heard another small thump. So I went to go check it out, and I checked on the cat first. I was thinking logically that it was the cat, and I figured if I calmed it down, it would stop acting out and not wake up the kid. Well, I opened up the door, and the cat was asleep on my friend's pillow. At first, I thought the little jerk was just pretending or something, and while staring at the cat, I heard the thump again, but this time, it was clear that it was coming from the other room where the kid was. I was immediately freaked out, thinking that the kid fell out of his crib or something. Before I could even close my friend's door, the cat freaked out and hid under the bed, and the kid in the next room started to cry. The crying definitely made me feel like he did fall, so I shut the door and went to the next room and opened the door quickly, and he was standing up in his crib crying. I felt relieved that he didn't fall, and I went to calm him down. Now, mind you, for some reason the electrical didn't work well in that room. The light switch didn't work, so you had to turn on the floor lamp by hand, so I was in a dark room with a crying baby. It then dawned on me to wonder what had been making that noise, so I turned on the light and looked around. The closet was open and some stuff seemed moved around, but nothing that looked like it fell several times or anything like that. So I closed the closet, mainly because the kid was crying while staring at the closet. He seemed to have calmed down, but it took me about 5 minutes to get him back to sleep. I left the light on and the door cracked so I could keep an ear out but not to wake him up from the sound of the TV. I had been watching TV again for only 10 minutes when I heard another thump noise. I got up and peeked into the baby's room. The kid was asleep still, so I opened the door some more to see if the closet was open. Now, it's a sliding door closet, which isn't as creepy as a walk-in closet with an actual door. But closets in general are creepy, especially at night. Anyways, my first instinct was to run, but I manned up and went to check out the closet and see what could have opened it. But there was no apparent reason. I just told myself maybe it was a mouse or something. A big mouse that can open the closet door. So like I said, I closed it up and I checked on the kid, still leaving the light on, and went back into the living room. Not even another 5 minutes went by and the kid was crying again. I didn't hear any thumping noise this time, so I figured maybe it was a normal baby cry, like the light was bothering him or he peed or something. So I went in again, and this time the closet was only open a little bit. I was extremely freaked out, and I had already texted my friend asking if they would come back soon. Once again, I went and closed the closet door. My hand reached for the edge of the door, and then I heard a small thump, and then one of those baby police car toys that have a siren sound effect went off in the closet. I opened it up slowly, and there was just the toy going off. The kid was still crying his head off, and I knew for sure that the toy was not in the closet beforehand. So I took it out, put it away, and closed the closet door. I put the kid back to sleep, and waited in the room with him this time instead of going back to the TV. He didn't go back to sleep, but I could tell that he tired himself out with the crying fit that he had. I felt uneasy in that room, like someone or something was watching me and was angry, especially from the area where the closet was. After about 15 minutes of waiting in the room, I stood up and started to head out. As I was leaving, the light then turned off, which is very odd since you have to turn it off manually since the wall switch doesn't work. I figured the bulb blew out or something, so I walked over using what little light that the nightlight offered as a guide towards the lamp. After I got to the lamp, I heard the closet door sliding open. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. My instincts kicked in, and I felt the switch on the lamp and turned it on, hoping that it would, which it did. Looking back, I was both relieved and creeped out that the bulb didn't burn out and that it somehow turned off by itself. Anyways, the light was back on, and I turned around, and luckily nothing was in there by the open closet door. That was the last straw though, so I grabbed the kid and shut the closet again. I shut the door to the room behind me and held the kid in the living room until his mom and my friend got back close to 9 p.m. At first, she was angry that I took him out of his crib and that he was awake, but I explained basically saying that you need an exorcist or someone to bless your house. I don't think she really believed me. She said that she noticed some small things happen before, but nothing as big and strange as I had described. That was almost a year ago, and apparently nothing that drastic happened again, so I was lucky to be babysitting for only 2 hours and experience my own personal horror movie. This story happened several years ago. I was out of town and I was staying in a hotel that was located in a fairly large city. So I remembered that in the morning I decided to go to the nearby library to get some work done. I had seen the library in the city when I had been on the way to the hotel, and it looked very large and nice as well. I figured that it would be a great place to get a lot of work done and much better than my hotel room. It was close enough that I was able to walk, so I went down there and found a nice place to get work done. I went to the second floor, and I went to a table by myself and then set up my laptop. For the next few hours, I worked in peace. At one point, I got up and went to the coffee shop that was inside of the library and got a coffee. Then I went back to work. After I had been there for much of the day, something strange happened. I saw this guy who was maybe 50 feet away from me, but he was standing next to a bookshelf and appeared to be filming me. He was holding what looked like his phone very steady and pointing it in my direction. It was sort of hard to notice him, but once I saw the man, it was easy to see. The guy was bald, sort of large, and had a slight goatee, but he was also wearing sunglasses. Now, at first, I wasn't sure if he was actually filming me or not. He was so far away that maybe he was filming something else or someone else that was nearby. Either way, it looked pretty strange. I looked around and didn't really see anything else that he would be filming. Then I just stared at him, wondering why he was doing this. A few seconds later, it was like he noticed me. Then he quickly disappeared around the corner. I was glad that he was gone, and I focused my attention back on my computer. However, maybe 30 minutes later, I looked up and noticed him again. He was doing the same thing, and this time I had enough. I got up from my seat and started to walk over. Sort of like I expected, the man quickly ran around the corner again and went out of sight. I decided to leave the library at that point. I was pretty much done with work for the day, but I wanted to look for the man and ask him what he was doing as well. So I packed up my stuff and then started walking around the library. I was looking all over for the guy and really wanted to confront him. However, I couldn't find him anywhere. I didn't know if he had left or what, so I decided to find an employee and then report him. I let them know what was going on, and then I left the library. After that, I walked back to my hotel and went inside. So that night, I went out for a while, and when I arrived back at my hotel, I went to bed. The next morning, I got up and I was leaving the hotel out the lobby. As I was doing so, I saw the guy again. He was sitting in the lobby sort of looking around. I didn't know what he was doing there, but I quickly walked out of the hotel and left. I made sure that he didn't follow me out. When I got back to the hotel later that day, he was not there. I didn't know if he was staying at the hotel or not, so I asked someone working there and said what happened. The worker at the desk didn't know who I was talking about and said that she hadn't seen the guy. I was creeped out by his behavior, and I wondered if he had somehow followed me to my hotel or something. For the rest of the day, I didn't see him, and the following day, I left town. I haven't seen the guy since. Looking back, I don't know why he was seemingly filming me and then at my hotel. It still gives me the creeps to think about it.
I wanted to share this story to warn people, but it's not necessarily a creepy encounter, just a sort of story that's really weird and freaked me out. I'm traveling around the country in my car. I've been driving for over a week from the city that I lived in, and I've so far slept in my car to save money. It wasn't until I got to a big enough city that I decided to treat myself to an actual bed that would be comfortable. I opted to choose Airbnb because, well, it's cheaper than hotels. I booked this Airbnb the day before I arrived at the city, so there weren't many options left. I had found this apartment on Airbnb that looked very new and modern, and it was in a great location too. The price was decent for its location, and it almost seemed too good to be true. The only downfall was that it was listed as a new listing and had 0 reviews. I figured that the price was low because it was a new listing, and decided to just give it a shot. I mean, it must be legit because it is Airbnb, right? When I got to the apartment building, it was older looking than I'd expected. I later found out and realized that my Airbnb was most likely the only renovated apartment in the building, and the building seemed to be in very poor condition. It looked like a dorm hall rather than an apartment building. Anyways, I let it all slide because I wasn't really paying too much anyways, so what could I really expect? The apartment itself looked like the pics, so that was good enough. Everything went well for the first 2 days. As a female traveling alone, I always make sure to be safe. I don't go out when it's dark, and I always lock the door. That includes every single lock, including the chain thing. Anyways, on the 3rd day, I was out all morning and came back to the apartment to change to head to the beach. I had again locked the door, including the chain. I was in front of the door watching TV while changing, when the door suddenly unlocked and someone opened the door. I am beyond lucky that I'd put the chain lock on the door, or else it would have opened all the way. I was naked and no one else was supposed to have the keys but me. My first reaction was, Excuse me," and I closed the door right away, locking it again. I came from the back of the door and I didn't look or see who was opening it. I sat in front of the door scared and shocked, realizing that this person could technically still get in here since they obviously have the keys to the apartment. At first, I thought maybe it was the owner coming back after I checked out, but I wasn't supposed to check out until the following day, so that wasn't possible. After crying for a few minutes, I recuperated myself and called the owner and told her what had happened. She told me that no one else should have a set of keys other than her and I, and that she's at work and that it wasn't her. I was scared to stay in the apartment because someone else could come in. I didn't want to leave because I had all of my valuables there, so it was a lose-lose situation. I then called my dad, who told me that it was not okay that someone has the keys and that she needs to take care of this ASAP. So he talked to her, and she told me that she'll be there shortly with a locksmith to change it and then give me a pair of new keys. She then proceeded to tell me that she had only had this apartment for 6 months, and that before I stayed there was only one other Airbnb booking. She also mentioned that it had been sitting empty other than those 2 bookings because she had been renovating the apartment, which now makes sense while the building looks like absolute crap and doesn't match the apartment. She told me that the only possibility for who that was could be the previous owners or someone related to them. That possibility in theory really messed with me. How is it possible that I was gone all day every day and the 10 minutes I was home someone tried to come in? Did they know I was there? What were they coming in for? If this apartment has been sitting empty for half a year, maybe they did this frequently. Or maybe they saw me come in and tried to do something to me. These questions are constantly on my mind. I just know that I'm so lucky that I put the keychain on the door. Or else, well, I don't even want to know what else could have happened. Needless to say, I won't be leaving a good review, and I won't be staying in an Airbnb that has no reviews or seems too good to be true. I definitely learned my lesson with this one.
I was 6 years old when this happened, and I never really understood what was going on at the time. It wasn't until a few years ago that it hit me how messed up everything actually was. My babysitter was a woman named Renee. She was around a lot because my mom was a busy woman. Renee was always high, like all the time. I didn't know what that meant back then, but she would always act weird, and sometimes she'd take me with her to meet her boyfriend so they could get drugs. I didn't understand what they were doing, but I knew that they were always off doing something and I wasn't supposed to ask questions. We lived in a bad part of town, a real run-down duplex building. It was the kind of place you don't want to be, but that's where we were. One day, I was supposed to get off the bus and be picked up by Renee, but she didn't show up. I didn't know why she wasn't there, but she was usually late or distracted with something. I stood there looking down the road, hoping that she would show up. It turned out that she was getting high with her boyfriend and totally forgot about me for hours. My mom found out, and she was furious and fired Renee after that incident. My mom didn't know about the drugs though, because I never told her. It wasn't really something I thought about. At that age, I didn't know how dangerous any of it was. Fast forward about a month or so from Renee getting fired, and my mom was running late to pick me up from the bus stop, and I was standing there waiting like usual. It wasn't uncommon for her to be late, so I didn't think much of it. Then, out of nowhere, Renee showed up. She asked, "Hey, where's your mom?" It wasn't strange to me at the time, even though it should have been. I didn't view Renee as a stranger, and she had been around enough that she felt familiar. I even thought maybe my mom had hired her again. Renee told me to get in her car. I didn't really question it because I didn't know any better. We drove to her place, and it was just as run down as I remembered it. It was a mess, with pill bottles everywhere, dirty dishes, and stuff just scattered all over. I didn't really know what to do, so I sat down on the couch and started watching TV. I wasn't paying attention to the time, but it felt like hours. Eventually, I heard a knock at the door. I didn't know who it was at first, but when I heard my mom's voice, I felt a strange rush of relief. I ran to the door, and that's when everything took a turn. The cops were there with her, and they arrested Renee right in front of me. I remember seeing her handcuffed, and I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew something wasn't right. Turns out Renee was arrested for some drug charge and kidnapping. I'm not sure what she was planning to do with me, but it's very strange that she just brought me to her house. My mom took me home, and we moved away soon after. I still wonder what would have happened if my mom didn't figure out that I was there that soon.
This didn't happen to me personally. It happened to two of my cousins. They gave me permission to share this story, so I'll be telling the story from their point of view. My name is Leah. The story happened in April 2016. I was 29 years old at the time, and I live in Atlanta. In April, me and my cousin, who I'll refer to as Kate, wanted to go for a Caribbean getaway. But we didn't want to go to these popular tourist destinations such as the Bahamas, Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, or Puerto Rico. We chose a lesser-known island called Dominica. It's a small island located between Guadalupe and Martinique, and the capital is Rosso. It has a population of about 72,000 people, so we booked an Airbnb located out in the countryside called Salisbury. It's 30 minutes away from Rosso. When we got there, the first 2 weeks went really well. We rented a car, and our Airbnb was perfect, and it was located near a nice peaceful beach. It was truly the getaway we needed. We explored the island, visited several beautiful waterfall locations, and even made some friends in the village we were staying at. But on the second day of the third week, something really horrible happened. One afternoon, Kate and I didn't go out and decided to just spend time at the nearby beach with the locals. Later on, the people left the beach to go home. Kate wanted to go back to the Airbnb, but I decided to stay there so I could enjoy some alone time. I closed my eyes, laying down near the beach, enjoying the peace and quiet. Before I knew it, it got dark, so I decided that it was time to get back to the house. I walked and arrived at the Airbnb, but as I was getting my keys to unlock the door, two men wearing masks suddenly ran out of the bushes and started beating me with batons. One even threw a rock at me, and I was screaming in pain. My cousin Kate came out and tried to defend me, but the men also overpowered her as well. They then ran into the Airbnb house and ransacked the entire place, and then they ran away. The other villagers saw what was happening and quickly came to our aid, but the two men had already ran away. They stole my laptop, my phone, and my wallet, but by luck, Kate's laptop was also stolen. Luckily, our passports weren't stolen. I was bleeding profusely, and Kate was bleeding even more. At some point, I felt like I was gonna pass out. The police came over, and we told them what happened, and even the police officers were horrified. Dominica is usually a very safe country, so everybody was in shock. Two of the villagers drove us to the hospital, which was in Rosu. We got hospitalized because we were so badly injured. We even had to change the date for our return flight, but thankfully we got out alive. As far as we know, those two delinquents are still out there, but I really hope they got caught. This forever traumatizes Kate and I, however. I still like Dominica, and I would love to visit again someday. But next time, I'll definitely be a lot more cautious.
This is a really strange thing that happened a few years ago. So I went to the library to do some research. There was a nice library nearby, and it had 2 floors and lots of books. There were also quite a few nice areas to sit and study and things like that. So after getting there, I found a nice table sort of out of the way between some bookshelves to stop and work. I set my backpack down and got out my laptop and notebooks. I found some books as well on the topics that I was researching. From that point on, I got very focused. For several hours, I was locked in, and I got a lot of very productive work in. The library was peaceful and relaxing, and my research was going very well. So when I was finally about done, I remember looking over to the end of the table and I noticed something. There was a small envelope that was just sitting there. It was like someone had left it there for me. I reached for it and I picked it up. There was something inside, so I looked at it, and when I did, I saw that there was a photograph, and the photograph was of me. It had been taken at some time when I was in the library studying, just a little earlier. It showed me from the back side, and I looked behind me when I saw that. I realized that whoever had taken the photo had taken it from the other side of the bookshelf. It was really weird and creepy. I looked, but the person was obviously gone by then. I had no idea that the picture had been taken at all. I looked around the rest of the immediate area. There weren't really that many people around. I packed up my stuff and then I started to walk away. The only other person in the immediate area was a woman who was sitting at a table almost around the corner. I asked her if she had seen somebody leave the envelope at my table by chance. Sadly, she said no. I decided to leave and I looked around, seeing if anybody appeared to be staring at me weird or anything. I didn't see anything strange though. As I was leaving, I was trying to figure out who would do that or why. I'd been so focused on my studying that I obviously had no idea that my picture had been taken. Soon I left the library and I walked back out into the parking lot to go to my car. As I was walking there, things were pretty quiet. There were a few vehicles scattered around, but then I noticed something. At the end of the lot, there was a truck that had been backed into a spot. I saw the window was rolled down and there was a man with a camera covering his face in the driver's seat. Almost as soon as I noticed him and started looking in his direction, he appeared to snap another photo. Then he quickly turned, put the camera away, and drove off. I never got a good look at him. I figured that he must have been the man who also took the picture of me in the library. I didn't recognize him in the small look that I got, and I also didn't recognize his truck. I was very confused. Then I drove home, making sure that I wasn't followed or anything. I was able to make it back okay. I didn't go back to that library for a while after that, and to this day, I don't know why the guy did that. It remains a mystery.
This was last winter. I can't recall exactly when, but I know it was snowing a lot during this week, and I barely left the house because of it. I worked what I think is called hybrid, so sometimes from home and sometimes in the office. Because of the snow, I stayed home this whole week and worked from a small desk in my bedroom. My house was small, only one story, and just 2 bedrooms. On this day, I got up and made coffee, then sat down to work, and pretty much stayed at my desk until 8 p.m. It was windy and snowing outside the whole day. When I finally got up, I made dinner, then cleaned up around the house, then went outside to bring the trash bins down to the curb. As I was walking back to the front door, I noticed the snow on the left side of my house looked strange. Like everywhere else, it was piled up and flat, but over there, something clearly had messed with it. So I walked over to get a closer look, and could quickly recognize that it was a line of shoe prints going through the snow. This was a little concerning, because it was really close to my house, not just like kind of in the area. I followed the prints, going all the way down the side of my house, until there were suddenly no more. At the end, it looked like they'd moved around in this one spot for a while, and it was directly outside the window to my bedroom that I was working in. This was extremely creepy. I mean, it was cold, windy, and snowing. Why was anyone even outside walking around to begin with, and going up to my window? Thankfully, I had the blinds shut, but you could still kind of see through the cracks. Right on the other side of the window was my desk, so they could have been watching me. I hoped I was just overthinking it. I went back inside and warmed up. I didn't exactly know what else to do about it. Obviously, they weren't there anymore, so there was nothing to do. I continued with my night, eventually going to bed around 11. I had checked out the window one last time before sleeping, and the snow had covered up all the tracks from before, and there were no new ones, so I felt better. I triple-checked that it was locked, then got in bed. I slept through the night. The first thing I did once I woke up was go over to the window and check again. My tired face immediately woke up. There were fresh prints in the snow again, right by the window. I quickly threw on my jacket and snow boots and ran outside. The prints were almost exactly the same as before, going up to the side of my house and piling up right under my window. I looked around at the empty blanket of snow that covered the rest of the ground near my house, but there were no signs of anything else or anyone nearby. I went back inside. I ended up calling the non-emergency police number to report what was going on. I knew they wouldn't be able to do anything, but I thought that at least if something did happen, they would be aware of the situation. After that, I had to work though. I tried to check out the window every so often, but the snow slowly filled in the shoe prints, and I never saw anything more. I got out of work at 8 again, so the sun had long set, and the night was cold and windy. I got up from my desk and went to the window, pushing aside the blinds and seeing flat, untouched snow. The relief I felt was immense, but my eyes floated down just as I was letting go of the blinds, and my heart nearly stopped. The latch was undone. It wasn't locked anymore. I couldn't believe it. I'd triple-checked it last night and never touched it since. I shakily reached my hand down and grabbed the handle. The window opened with ease. I felt my heart racing. They had to have unlocked it last time they were here, which was in the middle of the night. How did I not hear it? And did they get inside? I backed away and crept into the hallway. My eyes sifted through every inch of the hallway as I slowly made my way to the front door. I got my keys and put my boots on, then ran out to my car. I called the police and stayed in the driveway. I don't think my car could make it out of the snow, even if I wanted to leave. 10 long minutes later, an officer pulled up. He went inside to make sure it was clear. Time seemed to move extremely slow. I waited as the minutes passed. Once it got close to 5 whole minutes, I knew something was wrong. Then he finally came out with a man in handcuffs. Both the officer and the man were covered in blood, clearly having gotten into an altercation. The officer said he was hiding in a hallway closet and jumped him. The man was 45 and just had that creepy, evil look to him. There was no saying what he was trying to do, but clearly he was capable of violence. I don't know what would have happened had that gone on for any longer.
When I was a kid, I was always really scared of going down in our basement. I don't really know why, but I guess a lot of kids are scared of that sort of stuff. It just always felt like there might be somebody hiding down there or something. Of course, I knew that wasn't true, but any time I had to go down there alone, I would always run back up the stairs really fast. If someone else like my parent was down there with me and the lights were on, I wouldn't be so scared, but if I ever had to go down there alone, I was. So one time when I was 11 years old, I was getting ready for school one morning. My older sister had already left for high school, and I was going to ride the bus to my middle school when it came. Both of my parents left for work, so it was just me home alone for like 5 minutes. Normally, I would do things pretty last minute. I woke up about as late as possible before I would have to get ready for school. So I remembered that I was looking for my shirt, and I realized that it was downstairs. The laundry room was in the basement, and my mom had just done a wash the night before. I had to get my clothes from the hamper that was just outside of the clothes dryer. This meant that I would have to go downstairs by myself. Now, I wasn't as scared at 11 years old as I would have been at, say, 6, but I was still sort of scared. I went down the stairs and then made a beeline for the laundry room. Then I dug through the clothes until I found my shirt. After I got it, I went out of the laundry room and then sprinted for the stairs and ran up them. As I was running to the stairs, though, I thought that I saw somebody out of the corner of my eye. The basement was mostly dark, but it looked like a person was standing in the room just down the hallway. I never looked directly in that direction, and as I was running up the stairs, I told myself that it was just my imagination, and I actually believed that. I got back up the stairs, closed the door behind me, and then finished getting ready for school. I went outside, locked the front door, and then went to the end of the driveway. I made it with a minute to spare before the bus arrived. Then I boarded it and went to school. After the school day was over that day, I rode the bus back home and was dropped off at about 3 p.m. My sister was at volleyball practice until about 5, and my parents were both still at work, so I was home by myself for a few hours. This was common, and I was used to it. I would usually just hang out or do homework. So when I got inside that day, I went into the living room and started doing my homework to get it out of the way. I was sitting on the couch, and sometime during that, I thought that I heard the basement door open. This was really strange because nobody else was home. I didn't know what that could be. Instantly though, my heart started racing and I was very nervous. I froze and listened. I thought that I heard footsteps. That area of the house was not in my view at all, but hearing those noises was enough for me. I ran as fast as I could to the stairs and then bolted up them all the way upstairs to my bedroom. Then I shut the door behind me and I hid underneath my bed. I was terrified. I still thought that somehow it was maybe my imagination though. I got the phone in my bedroom and I called my parents and told them about it. They said if somebody was in the house to call the police, and also that they would be home soon. Now, after I got off the phone with them, for some reason I did not call the police. I think that I thought that I might have just been imagining what I heard. I never for sure saw a guy. Even that morning I was not 100% sure. Maybe I thought that I was just paranoid from earlier that morning. About an hour later, my parents arrived back home. When they did, I finally came out from underneath my bed and went downstairs again. And when I got downstairs, I saw that the basement door was wide open. I knew that I had closed it. The back door to the house was also unlocked, which had been locked all the time. Someone had been in our house. My dad looked all over but never found anyone or anything that was evidence. Nothing was missing or messed up. It remains a mystery of who entered our house and why. It still gives me the creeps to think about it to this day. I was maybe 8 years old at the time, which would make my sister 12 years old. Our parents were out for their anniversary dinner, which meant they'd be out until midnight probably. My sister was very responsible for a 12-year-old and capable of babysitting me, which was her job that night. I didn't find out until years later, but apparently my parents warned my sister that night about our grandma. My dad's mom had manic depression, which basically meant she was bipolar. They told my sister that she was mad at my dad for holding some boundary with her, and to not let her in or even respond to her if she came by the house. Of course, none of this was communicated to me, because how could you tell an 8-year-old something like that? Anyway, a couple of hours into the evening and we heard a knock on the door. My sister immediately shushed me and held her finger over her lips. I remember hearing my grandma's voice calling out for my dad. "Robbie, I know you're in there. Robbie, come open the door." I remember it like it was yesterday. I could tell it was my grandma, but I could also tell that something wasn't right. My sister moved us to the hallway where we sat quietly out of sight of any windows. Grandma kept pounding on the door, demanding that my dad let her in. Then it went quiet for a while and I started to relax a bit. Of course, that didn't last. Suddenly, a bedroom window started getting slammed and my grandma sounded like a demon screaming for my dad. I've never heard such anger since. She moved around the whole house, pounding on every window. If she wasn't so old, she surely would have broken a window with the absolute fury she was exuding. Then it went quiet again, but this time I knew better than to relax. My sister and I were just huddled together in the hallway in complete silence. I was shaking like a leaf now, too. This grandma had played games with my sister to hurt my parents in the past. Things such as taking her to the mall and going to the register with some jewelry and then saying never mind, or buying the same jewelry for our cousin. Seriously, some messed up stuff. Anyway, it was quiet for a while. And out of nowhere we heard Grandma putting on this sweet voice and directly addressing us children and trying to coax us with candy to open the door. She always had a ton of candy around since she was also a diabetic. This was the most surreal experience for an 8-year-old me, as she had just sounded like Satan himself, and now she sounded like a sweet old granny again. Her sweet voice persuaded me enough to let her in, but thankfully my sister was wise beyond her years and held me tightly. Finally, it was quiet for about an hour straight, and my sister said it was time for bed. My bedroom faced the backyard, which had a pool and a high wall, beyond which was a vast empty field with an old railroad track. I was used to hearing coyotes, foxes, and other animals. Right as I was winding down to fall asleep, the absolute loudest scratching on my window started. I could see the silhouette of my grandma in the moonlight as it was a full moon that night. I did what made the most sense to me at the time, and I buried myself under the covers until the scratching stopped. No other windows got scratched that night, just mine. I woke up the next day and my sister was telling our parents all about it. I couldn't even be in the room while it was being discussed. A few weeks later, my grandma died from an E. coli infection. As an 8-year-old home alone with just my older sister that night, it was the scariest night of my life, especially since I didn't understand anything or even know about my grandma's mental state.
This was in mid-November of last year. I had just gotten laid off due to budget cutting at the office. Luckily, I had some money saved up to cover for me while I searched for a new job. For several weeks, I was stuck at home, just looking through lists of job openings on my laptop. After the first 2 weeks, though, I started to get a bit impatient. I applied to pretty much every position I was interested in, and I hadn't gotten a single response. I ended up trying to look on different websites from the usual ones. One of them I had a bit more luck on, finding a few new ones to apply to, and later in the day I finally got an email from one of them. The manager introduced himself as Zach, and in the email he said his schedule was pretty packed, but he wanted to get an interview with me that night if possible. I wasn't fully prepared, nor did I feel comfortable enough to ask why it had to be tonight, but I definitely didn't want to let this slip by without trying. I thought showing up on short notice would be a good way to show my commitment. The job was just some regular sales job from the looks of it, but the pay was worth it. I agreed to the interview, and Zach sent me the address and said to be there at 7:30. I got ready and headed over, arriving 15 minutes early. I didn't have any time to research the place or anything, so I wasn't all too sure what to expect. The place it had me pull into was the parking lot of a small building. It wasn't obvious from the outside what the building was for. It only had an address number on it. I mean, I assumed it was just an office, because it was a sales job, but it was hard to say because all the lights were off. The parking lot was also empty. Something felt wrong. I checked the address again and looked it up, and it came back to the same spot. The building had no name on Google either. I called the phone number attached to the email that Zach sent me. He didn't pick up. I called a couple more times and still got no answer. I waited until 15 minutes past the scheduled time, then decided to leave. Dark, empty building with nobody in the parking lot, and getting no reply from the interviewer. The whole thing felt sketchy, and in hindsight, I should have been more aware to the possibility. I drove home. I was upset about the waste of time, but overall, I just wanted to move past it. I told myself I'd stick with the regular job search websites and would continue the search in the morning. I wasn't sure if Zach gave me the wrong address on accident, or what really happened, but I didn't waste more of my time thinking about it. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on the couch, cracking it open and turning on the TV. With no job, I had no bedtime, so I pretty much just chilled on the couch until I felt sleepy. Throughout the hours, though, I kept hearing something upstairs, just like a creak in the ceiling. I checked out the window a couple of times to see if it was windy outside, but it wasn't at all. The creaking didn't concern me really. It didn't sound abnormal by any means. I think I got tired around 10 p.m. I shut off the TV and the downstairs lights, then walked upstairs to the bedroom. The last thing I remember was getting in bed and laying down, falling asleep really quickly, before suddenly I was awake again. My eyes were opened to the pitch black room. As I laid there, I heard that same creak sound that I'd been hearing. It was close to me, like somewhere on the other side of the room. I looked over with my tired eyes, barely seeing anything in the dark. But then there was the slow and quiet sound that I recognized as the closet sliding open. My eyes opened a little more, seeing just the outline of the closet door slowly opening. I felt almost like I was frozen, just stuck in place, unable to move as I watched this happen. My mind wasn't fully convinced this was even real. It wasn't until the closet stopped moving and a figure leaned out from behind it that my body jerked out of the frozen state I was in. I grabbed my phone and jumped out of bed, opposite to the side the closet was on. The figure didn't move though. They just stood still and stared at me, almost like they were hoping I somehow didn't see them. Standing up though, and with my eyes adjusted, I was 100% sure what I was seeing was real. I ran out of the room and left my house as I spoke to a 911 operator. It was probably dumb of me, but I stood in my front yard and watched through my front door at the staircase. I didn't want whoever was in there to leave without getting caught. Obviously, they could have been dangerous and armed, so it wasn't the smartest decision. A few minutes later, 2 cops showed up. I never saw anyone come down the stairs, so I told them where I last saw the guy. They went in and found him still hiding in the closet. When they pulled him out and dragged him into the car, I couldn't believe how disturbing this guy looked. Oily, long and messy hair, disgusting clothes, and these wide, unfriendly eyes. He didn't say a single word as to what he was doing, but it only took a couple days to get the whole story. He had made these fake job listings on multiple sites. There were actually hundreds of fake listings he made, all for different types of jobs. Disturbingly, he had all my info from the resume I sent in, and he knew exactly when I'd leave my house for the interview, so he broke in while I was gone. That whole night, he was in my home with me, and just a couple feet away while I was sleeping. However, we still never got an answer as to what he was planning to do. Without him outright saying it, there's no way for me to ever know what was going to happen that night. I used to work for Domino's. I only had the job for a couple of months, but for the most part, I didn't find it to be too bad. I ran pizzas back and forth from the shop and made extra from tips. This night, I got in at 8. Our store was always open until 12, and we got a surprising amount of orders that late, too. Like, we stayed steady throughout the night, all the way up until closing. This order came in toward the end of the night. I want to say around 11 or so. I was just running through the orders one after the other, so I grabbed this one and started heading down the road. It was in a direction I wasn't as familiar with, just because most of the orders came from the same general area. This one took me to the more spread out and woodsy part of town. I always thought this was where the rich people had their isolated mansions hidden in the trees, but at night, it didn't look like much of anything was out there. I drove until the directions told me to turn down a gravel road. It was wide and had lamps on the sides, guiding me down the whole way, and at the end it split off into 5 smaller paths, too thin for a car to fit down. There was a sign there that said something like, "Welcome to the Frosted Oak Cabins." It was a cabin rental property. I looked back at the address that was on the order, and it said Cabin 3 at the end. I looked at the signs next to each path and found one that led to Cabin 3. These paths had dimmer and smaller lamps going along them, so I couldn't see down very far. I had no idea how long I was going to have to walk for. I parked the car and picked up the pizzas, then began walking. The dim lamps felt even worse as I got further in, because I almost couldn't see anything until I was right up next to one. So I'd be in the light for a few seconds, then walk blindly to the next one for a minute. I was worried I'd drop the food or trip on something. The woods were pretty calm though, just the sound of crickets and the leaves rustling in the wind. I think I walked for 3 or 4 minutes, though it felt like longer, before I made it to the last lamp and the end of the path. There was a little opening in a very small cabin in the middle. It had a window on the front, and oddly there was no light coming from it. The cabin was dark. I walked up and knocked on the door. I could hear the knock echo inside the cabin, but there wasn't the slightest sound in return. I pulled my phone out and called the number on the order. It rang for a whole minute and ended without anyone answering. I wasn't sure exactly what to do. I didn't want to walk all the way back for nothing. I looked out at the woods as I stood there, thinking about what else to do. Then I got a text. It was from the same number I just called. The text read, "I'm not at the cabin right now. The door is unlocked. Please leave the pizzas on the table inside. Thanks." I turned and faced the door again, then twisted the handle. I pushed the door open just a little bit. I know they told me to, but it still felt kind of wrong. All the lights were off, and it was extremely dark. "Hello? Is anyone home?" With no reply, I pushed the door further open and took a few steps inside. It looked like just one long, open room, and maybe a small bedroom at the end. I went over to the table and started setting down the food when I heard a creak. My eyes shot over to the bedroom door, not getting to even think before it suddenly opened. I almost had a heart attack. I thought nobody was home. A man appeared in the doorway and started walking toward me as I nervously stuttered over my words. The man tried to tell me he had my tip and was thanking me for bringing it inside, but he was walking aggressively fast toward me. I backed up as he got just a couple feet away. He jumped forward, trying to grab me as his face shifted into rage. I ran out the front door, but instantly slammed into someone else. He fell in the grass, and I caught myself from falling, sprinting back to the path. I heard both of them chase after me, but every time I glanced back, they weren't within the light of any of the lamps. I made it to my car and sped out before they ever caught up to me. I called the police. Both men were gone, of course, but I was hoping that with the order, phone number, and cabin rental, they'd easily be able to identify them. However, they couldn't. They broke into the unrented cabin, used a fake phone number, and paid online with a Visa gift card. There was nothing to identify them with. Thinking back on what happened is almost more terrifying. Obviously, it was their plan to get me out there and into the cabin so they could trap me inside. But the other guy came out of nowhere. Was he out there in the woods, watching me the whole time, waiting for me to go in? Had he been just a moment faster, they would have succeeded, and I don't know what they would have done.
Don't take this too seriously. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for this, but I'm just really glad I didn't take the chance. Super creepy nevertheless. About 2 weeks ago, I booked an Airbnb in another country. I was going there for a concert. The room was cheap, so I knew I wasn't going to be staying in a 5-star hotel. But it was only for one night, so I didn't mind as long as I had a bed. To start off, it already wasn't a great trip because my data roaming apparently didn't work in that country at all. I logged into a cafe Wi-Fi and planned my route in advance as best as I could. Managed to be at the house just in time, rang the only bell and waited. Nobody came out. I repeatedly rang and waited for 5 minutes. I noticed the door had a slot for mail and looked through it. I was shocked to see an entrance that looked like an abandoned barn. A super dusty couch right in front of the door, pieces of furniture covered in cloth, very dirty and extremely old. I usually love old houses, but that just did not look like a house that was in use or prepared for guests at all. I wondered if I was at the wrong house, and what do I do now? As a super old, unwashed looking guy walked towards the door from the street. I asked him if he knew where the Airbnb was. He mumbled something which I interpreted as positive, so I asked him if he was Tim, who was supposed to be my host. He said yes and opened the door for me. Well, I already described the entrance, so there's no point in doing that again. The centerpiece was definitely the super old creaky staircase that led to the upper part of the house. I followed him upstairs. He was heaving and coughing and just absolutely stinking of cigarettes, which wasn't exactly pleasant, but whatever. The second floor was also abandoned looking. It was super dark with clustered furniture hung with cloth, and it was randomly thrown together, and a super creepy curtain that I couldn't catch a glimpse behind. Another stair up and we were in my hallway, which was honestly the worst one. Cracks in the walls and old rural paintings and crosses hung up next to them. It seriously looked like the set of a horror movie. I usually don't have problems with decor like that. I'm goth, so anything darkly inclined is my jam. But everything looked so badly taken care of, so I got major creepo vibes from this house. He showed me the bathroom, which had a huge hole missing in the bathtub tiling in the wall. Everything just looked super dirty. He showed me to my bedroom, which was honestly okay. There were just a lot of creepy dolls on the shelves that threw me off, but the bed seemed fine. I asked him if he had Wi-Fi, and he said no, which really sucked. I really hoped they would have it because that meant I would have no way to communicate there. I asked him when checkout was the next day. He said it doesn't matter. Okay. He then dragged himself up to the 4th story, which was in complete pitch black darkness by the way, so that gave me very weird vibes. I definitely didn't want to get into the shower, so I just quickly changed and charged my phone. When I went to the bathroom, I realized that I didn't even notice the creepiest part. There were no locks, like at all, which really freaked me the hell out. I also noticed that there were so many half-used items that someone left there, like shower gels, toothbrushes, and toothpaste. I guess it was the guests before me? A random lash curler just laid abandoned on the shelf. Not like a, here you go for your use in case you forgot yours way, but it just looked like someone left it and nobody bothered to clean it away. I already made up my mind that I would definitely not stay the night in this house. My mind was just spinning scenarios. What if all these products were left by the people before me? And why did nobody leave horrendous reviews? Because they got murdered? I asked myself, laughing. I was super spooked out. I seriously debated if I should take all my crap to the concert because it just didn't feel safe in the slightest. But my back was really hurting from my heavy backpack. So I just took my essentials and left the room as soon as I could. Not without sliding a folded paper under the door so I'd see if someone tried to open it in my absence. When I was coming down the staircase, I had heard someone turning a key in the front door. I was a bit confused, but in the advert it said that a couple lived there, so I expected to see the wife or girlfriend of the guy that I had already met. Instead, a middle-aged man enters and then says, "Hey, I'm Tim." All I could think of was, then who the hell was the other guy? I was really crapping myself inside, but had brief small talk with him and then finally left the house. I was shaking. I luckily made it in time to the venue and the concert was well worth it. Afterwards, I was so tired that I knew I couldn't stay awake for the whole night, so I checked into a hotel. It wasn't perfectly clean, but at least it had Wi-Fi, a proper shower, and a door with a dang lock. The next day, I got thrown out at 10 a.m., so I made my way to get the rest of my stuff. I don't know why, but I had checked the mail slot again and jumped back. The old guy was just snoring on the couch directly in front of the entrance door. I tried my best not to wake him, and I sneaked into my room to get my crap, and then I finally left this godforsaken place. I also want to mention that the door actually hadn't been opened, thank God. I really don't know if I overreacted, but honestly, from the first 2 Tims to the missing locks and a checkout that didn't matter, if I assumed the worst, this would have been the perfect setup to assault or murder someone. Best case scenario, nothing actually would have happened, but I probably would have had panic attacks all night. Usually I really love solo traveling, but this was just way too much.
For one semester when I was in college, I worked at the library on campus. I would sit behind the desk and check out people's books for them. Many nights I found myself working alone. The library was typically not very busy, so one evening I was working until the library closed and I happened to be by myself. As it got later, there were a few students studying or whatever here and there. I recall a man walking in who looked to be in his 40s or so. He walked sort of past me and into the library. A while later, the other students left and it was about time to close. I remembered then that the man that I had saw entering had never left yet. I made an announcement that we were closed and then waited a good 10 minutes. As far as I was aware, he was the only person still in the library other than me. After I made the announcement, I waited, and the man never left. I had a bad feeling knowing that I would have to go and find him and tell him to leave. I started to walk around the library looking for the man. I went down a bunch of aisles and past many bookshelves. Soon, though, I heard footsteps. The man was definitely in there, but a few aisles away. I walked closer to there, but I heard his footsteps moving even farther away. It was almost like he was trying to walk away from me or avoid me. I then called out to the man, saying that we were closed now and he would have to leave. He didn't say anything. I continued to walk closer to him, and he continued to walk farther away. If I got to the aisle he had been in, he would quickly go around the corner to another one. It was like he was purposely running away from me and trying to avoid me. I was getting frustrated. I called out to the man again, asking what he was doing. He still just ignored me. The man continued to play the cat and mouse game of just avoiding me. I wasn't really sure what to do. I walked back over to my desk and sat down. Then I texted a couple of friends telling them of the crazy situation. I knew that I could just call campus security, but I didn't really want to have to do that. I told myself though that if the guy didn't leave soon, I would. Thankfully, about 2 or 3 minutes later, I saw the guy quickly go from around a corner and come into my sight. He made a beeline for the door and walked out really fast. I was just glad that he was gone. I took a few minutes and finished up everything that I had to do and then left. I lived in the dorms at this time, and my building was just on the other side of campus. It was nighttime now and really dark out. Not many other students were out walking around at all. I started making my way back, but I soon realized that somebody was walking behind me. I looked back and it was the same guy. What are the odds, I thought to myself. I tried to walk faster, and I could then hear that the man walking behind me got faster as well. He remained behind me. I turned at one point and I could hear that he was still there. The guy was really creeping me out. I decided to just run for it. I took off, sprinting as fast as I could. I didn't bother to look behind me or listen to hear if the man was running as well. I just ran like crazy. My dorm building was within sight and I just had to get there. I was able to make it and then get inside. I made sure that the door closed behind me. Then I went up to my room and I felt safe again. After that, I never saw that guy again, on or off campus. I still wonder who he was and what he was doing. Why would he stay in the library so long, and why would he follow me? I wonder what would have happened if I didn't run back to my dorm. Like I said, I only worked at the library for that one semester, and I'm glad I stopped after that.
I was visiting my parents over spring break. This was the first time I'd tried out Airbnb, since the city I was going to was small and Airbnbs were cheap there. I made the 2-day drive and pulled in just after the sun had set. As I parked in the driveway and got my stuff out of the car, I looked around at the neighborhood I was in. The atmosphere felt a little off. It was very dark and not busy in any way at all. No streetlights on the road and nobody walking around or driving. And the Airbnb home I was at was the only house with lights on. It wasn't even that late, but all the other houses were dark. There were maybe 1 or 2 lights in a couple of houses, and that was it. Maybe things around here were just different. I didn't know. I headed into the house and got my things unpacked. I had no plans for this night, aside from resting from the long drive and just getting comfortable at the rental. I ate some snacks and turned on a movie in the bedroom. A couple hours went by. It was probably around 9 or 10 when I heard something outside of the room. I paused the TV and waited a few seconds. Then I heard it again. It was someone knocking on the front door. I immediately checked my phone, thinking maybe I missed a call from the host, but I had nothing. I got up and went down to the front door. That whole time, they were continuously knocking, so it seemed like they actually needed me for something, and it wasn't just a salesman or whatever. I opened the door. There was a man in his 30s wearing a black winter hat and a distressed red flannel. He looked confused when he saw me. I said hi. He sort of awkwardly smiled, then went back to a straight face. He mumbled something under his breath as he turned around and walked away. I just stood there in disbelief and watched him walk down to the road. I closed and locked the door. I really had no idea what to think about that. The way he was knocking over and over, only to just not say anything and leave, was weird. Maybe he had the wrong house and was just too awkward to say anything. I went back to the bedroom. The rest of that night was fine, and I got up early in the morning to go out and see my parents. I was out until 6. When I got back to the rental, I was pretty tired again, so I went to the bedroom and just watched TV and chilled for the rest of the night. But around 9 again, there was that same knocking at the front door. This time, I was more worried than confused. I still checked my phone again for any texts or calls, but there wasn't anything. I was a little more cautious, walking up to the door this time. I checked out the peephole first, and it was the same guy. He was wearing the same hat and flannel. This time, I only cracked open the door and asked what he needed. The man's reaction was almost identical to last time, except it was more dramatic, like he really didn't expect to see me again. "Is everything okay? Was there someone you were looking for?" The man looked at me with a straight, hollow face. "No," he said in a monotone voice. He turned and walked away again. I really didn't know what that guy was looking for, or who he thought lived here, but it was getting creepy. I went back to the bedroom, but left the door open to the hallway so I could hear better. Something about this was really strange, and I didn't like it at all. A couple hours went by. It was late, so I turned off the lights and went to bed. When I woke up, my eyes opened to the pitch-black bedroom. It was dark and quiet, still the middle of the night. I wasn't sure why I'd woken up, but I sat up and I started to hear something from outside, maybe like a whisper or something. Then there was a sudden knock at the front door. It was loud and harsh. I got up from the bed and went into the hallway. The loud hits against the door shook the whole house. As I quietly crept down the hall, I caught a glimpse of something move past one of the windows on the other side of the hallway. When I got to the end and looked out the door, I saw that same guy. But further back in the dark, there was someone else. They were clearly hiding, waiting for something. I felt my body going numb from the adrenaline spiking. I turned around to go back and get my phone, but instantly locked eyes with a man staring at me through the back window. I panicked and sprinted into the bedroom. I heard multiple footsteps start running around the house. Not just like a couple, it sounded like maybe a dozen men out there. As I called the police, I heard all the windows and doors around the house being moved and attempted to be opened. Several excruciating minutes went by as I listened to this group of men surround the house and try to force their way in before I heard sirens in the distance. All the men disappeared within seconds. With the place being an Airbnb, the police contacted the host, who seemed more annoyed than concerned. It was a little weird, considering the experience I just went through on his property, staying at his house. To sum it up though, they never figured out any more details. After the years, I think my best guess is that someone else had stayed at the Airbnb that knew the men that showed up. They probably thought he lived there, and when they saw me answer, they were confused. Maybe they were mad at the previous guy, or just wanted to talk to him and thought I was hiding him or something. Or they could have just been insane. The host was definitely a little strange, too. I wouldn't be surprised if the group had some beef with him and found this address was under his name. Whatever the true intentions were, I guess we'll never know. I live in the middle of nowhere. It's flat, barren farmland for miles in all directions. There's a main highway that's not too far from me, but that's about the only paved road around here. Everything else is dirt, or if you're lucky, gravel. Nearest town is 20 minutes away, and it isn't really much of a town. Anyway, I'm 44 and retired, so I spend most of my days at home. This was a regular, ordinary day for me. It was raining, which it had been for the last week, and I was inside going about my routine. Around noon, I decided to head out to my front porch to have a smoke and enjoy the falling rain. I don't know how long I sat out there for, probably an hour, when I noticed someone coming down the far dirt road that led up to my house. Again, it was flat land, so I could see pretty far, although the rain made it a bit more difficult. This person was on a bike though, like an ADV motorcycle or dirt bike, riding through the rain. I thought it was odd, but assumed they just mistook my driveway for being a dirt path. They kept coming down it though, until they were getting really close to my house. They basically got right up to where my garage was, before stopping. The man looked older, but was wearing a full-face helmet, and he was sitting on the driveway looking at my house until he noticed me. He watched me for a moment, then turned around and rode back the way he came. That was probably one of the strangest encounters I'd ever had on my property. Nobody ever comes down here, because they shouldn't. I had to assume it was just a mistake. I stayed out for a while longer, then the rain and wind started picking up, so I went back inside. I had almost entirely forgotten about the unforeseen visit earlier. I made another cup of coffee and relaxed inside. I was on a call with my brother for a while and took a nap as well. The day was chill, no errands to run or things to do around the house. The rain made a pretty sudden change around 8 p.m. though. There was thunder and lightning, and heavy downpour that thumped relentlessly against the old roof. But somehow through it, I heard the slightest sound of a heavy engine outside. It had that same dirt bike sound that was identical to the one that came by earlier in the day. I went up to my front window, seeing a headlight carving its way through the fog and rain. In the moment, I didn't even think about how crazy it was to be out riding at night in this awful weather, because all I could think about was why had they come back? As they got closer, they shut off their headlight, and instantly they disappeared. I couldn't see them at all. I waited, but they never came up to the garage like they did last time. Minutes went by without me seeing or hearing anything. Where could they have gone? Unfortunately, situations like these can't easily be called into the police station, so I was on my own. I grabbed my shotgun from the bedroom, which I only kept for self-defense. I had no idea what was going on, if they were lost or needed help, or if they were dangerous. All I knew was that I was alone in the middle of nowhere and needed to be extra cautious. I spent the next 20 minutes routinely checking out the windows on all sides of my property. I saw nothing more until I made another round, and when I looked out the back window, I just made out something in the fog. It quickly moved away. The eerie nature of it sent chills through me. Being unable to see anything and having no real way to know what was going on made it as unnerving as it could possibly be. Then I started hearing muddy footsteps outside my house, like right up against the house, splashing in the mud and water. Every time I tried to get a look out the window, they'd move out of the way. I really didn't know what to do here. I felt if I let this go on for too long, things could get even more unpredictable and possibly messy. Clearly, their intentions were not harmless. I went into the garage and got in my truck, then quickly opened the garage door, pulled out, and closed it. My body was shaking the whole time, praying this didn't escalate. I moved the truck further out front and spun around to face the house. Finally, I turned on the high beams and the bar lights on the front. It immediately lit up my entire house, and standing right outside of one of the windows was a man. He was in full black clothing and holding a hammer in his right hand. It looked like he was trying to look into the window and maybe didn't even hear me pull out of the garage under the thunder and rain. The man sprinted off behind the house. I saw him get on his bike, which was laying in the grass far off from the house. He rode off into the dark. I stayed up that entire night. The next day, I went into town and notified the sheriff's office of the encounter. I don't know who that was, but seeing the hammer in his hand, it seems clear he was trying to break inside and probably had malicious intent. Luckily, I didn't have to find out the hard way. I used to do deliveries as kind of a side gig in my 20s. It's been a while since then, but I always remembered this one incident that happened during that time. This night, an order was put in at our restaurant at 9, and I went to drop it off around 9:20. I had no reason to believe this was anything other than a regular delivery order. The only slight difference was that it was a little bit farther than usual, being 20 minutes away. It was also 20 minutes in the other direction of most of the residential areas of our town. Our shop was near the edge, so this was just going into what I thought was a pretty barren area outside of town. Regardless, the address looked like it was just any other home address. I followed the directions, getting onto the highway. This wasn't like the typical huge 4-lane highways. It was just a 1-lane road that led from our town through the forest into the next town over. Everyone still called it the highway though. I knew there were some older neighborhoods and houses off this road, so I figured it was going to be one of them. I drove on that road for 15 minutes. It was pretty dead out there at that time of night. When the directions came to an end though, I was taken aback. It didn't tell me to turn anywhere. It just stopped at a seemingly random point in the road and said my destination was on the right. I pulled off to the side, at least to just figure out what was going on. I tried searching up the address on Google Maps and then on Apple Maps, and both of them led to exactly where I was on the road. I thought maybe I was missing something. I rolled down the window and looked out at the side of the road, but all I saw were trees. It looked like a forest and nothing else. No dirt driveways or lights or anything. I decided to just call the customer and ask where the hell his house was, or if there even was a house, because honestly, part of me was thinking this was some kind of joke. The phone rang, and I put it up to my ear as I continued looking out at the forest. Only a second later, a light suddenly glowed from out in the trees. It wasn't bright, but still noticeable in the pitch-black woods. It went out after a moment though, and before I could think about it too much, a voice came through the phone asking who was calling. "Hey, I got this order here, but I think we have the wrong address." He asked me where I was, and I described the area to him. Oddly, his response was that it sounded like I was in the right place. He said there was a small driveway going into the woods. I told him I didn't see it, but he said it was hard to find and that I might have to get out to look for it. I sighed and said alright, then got out and walked to the other side of my car. I started asking which direction I should look, but he suddenly hung up on me. I thought that was pretty weird, But it was even more strange when I looked up and saw that glowing light in the forest again. It shut off after only a second. What the hell? That had to be the guy I was just talking to on the phone. Why was he just standing out there and not coming up to the road? And if he was out there, then why wasn't I seeing a driveway going in that direction? I looked back down, and I guess I saw what he was talking about. There was an extremely thin, rugged dirt line going into the woods. I say line because that's basically all it was. Definitely not a driveway. It looked like it was scrappily carved with a small shovel or something. There was no way in hell I was going to walk down that and into the forest, especially not with whatever was going on with the guy out there. I set the food on the ground, right on the side of the road. As I did, I started to hear leaves rustling from the bushes out in the forest. I hurried up and got in my car, then bailed out of there. Thankfully, I wasn't dumb enough to listen to the man on the phone and go into the woods. Something was wrong. I could feel it, but I didn't have anything to really prove it. What could have happened that night, I'll never know.
One night, I was at home relaxing in the living room. At the time, I lived in a pretty small house with a roommate. We were both renting it, and during this time, my roommate was not home. So I was by myself, and I recall that about 11 o'clock at night, I heard this strange noise. It was coming from the back side of the house, but I couldn't really tell what it was. I also couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. I stopped hearing it for a short time, so I just ignored it. But then I heard it again a few minutes later. It was really strange, so I got up and walked over to the back of the house. It was very dark out, and the windows were covered. I took a quick look outside into the backyard, but didn't see anything. I couldn't quite tell if the sound was coming from outside or from the basement. I didn't really want to go down in the basement, but I felt like I had to. So I walked over and went down the stairs. This basement was not finished, and we never used it. When I walked down there, I didn't see anything, but I still heard the noise. I walked over to where it was coming from. When I made it nearby, I looked up, and there was the egress window in the basement. A man was right on the other side of it. When I saw him, I'm pretty sure that I jumped back about a foot. I really was not expecting to see him there. He saw me at about the same time, and then he started climbing back out of the window area and into the backyard. I had no idea what to do for a moment. Then I got out my phone and called the police. The man was gone, and I looked at the window, and it appeared somewhat damaged. The sounds that I heard must have been him trying to pry it open or something. I went back upstairs, and when the police got there, the man was long gone. I was unable to give a very good description of the guy because I only saw him for like a second, and I don't really remember what he looked like, sadly. The police told me though that there had been some break-ins in the area. After that, they left. I was nervous that the guy would return, but he did not. I only lived in that house for a year, and that was by far the craziest thing to happen. I'm not sure why the man wanted to break into our house specifically. Maybe he just liked to break into random houses. I'm guessing he also did the other robberies in the area. I also realized that I didn't see him when I looked into the backyard, because the place that he was in was out of my sight from there. I'm just glad that when he saw me there in the basement, he left. It was around 11 when this happened, and I still get scared by this. Back when I was 11 and lived on a busy block, I would babysit for some bartenders who had kids. Easy money, as the bar was right down the road, and once they got off, they could just come by and get their kids. Well, one night, I had 3 kids more than usual, but it was a Friday, so I understood. I had the kids laying down upstairs and decided to watch a movie. The way my living room was laid out was the TV on the wall and then the couch between the door and windows. I had laid my phone down and grabbed the remote to turn on the TV, and that's when I saw him in the reflection. There was a man behind me looking through the door. It looked to be a maybe 45-year-old man just staring blankly into my house. I placed the remote down and pretended not to see him and picked my phone back up. The first thing I did was call my mom, who at the time was one of the bartenders. I tried to make it look like I was scrolling on my phone, when in reality I was watching this man's every move in the reflection of the TV. When I saw him turn around to leave the porch, I was given some relief until I heard some noise. The bushes at the side of the house were being pushed and torn around. I knew where he was going, because through the bushes at the side of the house, there was a large window low enough and wide enough to climb in and out of. Without thinking straight, I dropped my phone, screaming to my mom, "He's trying to get in." Then I ran to my kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and ran back to the window. Right in front of me was the man. He didn't even seem surprised I had met him at the window. I watched him and angrily yelled that I wasn't afraid to cut him. Looking back on it now, I was a 5'2", 11-year-old who could barely stand straight. He obviously wasn't scared as he reached for the window and tried to pull it up. I made sure it was locked at the top of the window hatch, and it was. He just looked disappointed, like I was the one in the wrong. Just then, you could see bright lights and a few people shouting at the man by the bushes. My mom had been smart and didn't call the cops right away, as she knew with her bar being just down the street, she could get to my house faster than the cops probably. As I had shouted and dropped my phone earlier, her and a couple of the other bartenders who had kids I was babysitting left in a panic immediately to run to my aid. The man at the window heard them shouting and was able to run away and escape. I don't remember much after that, just unlocking the door to my mom hugging me instantly and the other bartenders running to check on their kids. I think the police eventually got involved, but I never had a problem with the man again for the rest of the time I babysat. I still don't know how long he was standing there just watching, waiting, and listening before he had made his move to try to enter the house. To do what, I'm not sure.
This happened a few years ago. The year 2018, me and 3 other friends decided to travel to Bali for about a week since it was cheap and we had the time. So I mean, why not? We were all males in our early 20s. Our itinerary includes sightseeing, trying local foods, mountain climbing, visiting bars at the beach, and basically just a typical vacation in Indonesia. It was honestly quite a surreal experience. The country's absolutely beautiful, and the food was amazing. The only issue I had about the trip were, well, the locals. Drugs were really prominent there, especially shrooms. The streets were filled with druggies dying to sell us their drugs. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. One dude even grabbed my arm because I ignored his 2-for-1 deal for a one-way trip to meet Jesus. I just shrugged it off while my friends laughed it off. He looked rabid and frantic, like he was about to pounce onto me like a dog diagnosed with rabies. I didn't feel too afraid as we were confident that we could handle them since half of them were not even sober. However, that is only the tip of the iceberg. The real horror started when we went back to our Airbnb for the night. We had an early day the next morning, and we were exhausted. The place was extremely cheap, and it didn't even have a proper locking mechanism for the door. It had 2 wooden doors which swung inwards, and the only way to lock them was to wedge a wooden block through the holes mounted on the door. It was quite a primitive lock, but it gets the job done, I guess. Everything was going well until the last night of our trip, when we realized that the wooden block was now missing. We looked everywhere for it, but to no avail. I just figured that one of us must have misplaced it somewhere. We settled for using a selfie stick. I know, it sounds like a horrible idea, but we used that instead since we didn't have anything that fits the holes to wedge the door close. We turned in for the night, seemingly not expecting anything since we had already stayed there for 6 days with no issues. I woke up to strange clicking sounds in the dead of the night. I got out of my bed and I thought maybe it's one of the guys, so I nonchalantly approached the noise. My friends were all sleeping, so I decided to investigate the cause of the noise. The ruckus seemed to be coming from the door, so I headed towards them feeling extremely confused. Who could be at our doorstep at this time of the night? I wondered. I noticed the doors were slightly opened and the selfie stick was horribly deformed. I peeked outside and saw 3 people staring through the gap between the doors. They were really close to the entrance and were attempting to push open the doors. I yelled at them, questioning their intentions, as I noticed one of them was holding the wooden block. I was shocked and puzzled at the situation as I then recognized one of the men. He did the overall cleaning for the Airbnbs and pathways during the day, so there's no reason for him to be there at 3 a.m. The other dude had asked if the wooden block belonged to us, as they allegedly found it outside of our Airbnb. I definitely smelled bullcrap in that moment, as there was absolutely no reason to do that at 3 a.m. I called for my guys, and the 3 men immediately ran for it. I clued in the guys on the circumstances, and we stayed up until morning came in case they tried anything funny. We decided to report to the reception about their employee, but the description I gave them was not synonymous with theirs. They told me that the housekeepers they usually hire really only consisted of females in their late 30s and 40s. This sent shivers down our spines, as we came to realize that we had let a complete impostor in and out of our rooms while we were out. Luckily, nothing important was lost, and we got out of that situation safely. I can't imagine what would happen if I didn't wake up on that fateful night, as the doors were so close to being open. I was just grateful that it was our last night there.
This story takes place back when I was 14 years old. I was a freshman in high school, and one evening my friend Dante came over. We would always play video games together when we had the chance, and usually down in my basement. My dad always called the TV in the living room his sports watching TV, and he had a lazy boy chair there as well. And that was fine with me, because the TV in the basement was larger. This time though, we were home by ourselves. My parents and older sister were all going to be gone until later that night. Dante and I were just hanging out playing Madden, when we randomly heard this noise from upstairs. I was so confused, because I knew that nobody in my family would be back yet. I asked Dante if he heard it too, and he said yes. We did have a cat, but the sound that we heard was like a person walking. A cat obviously could not make a sound that loud. Then we heard it again. We both paused the game and got up at about the same time. We were in the main room down in the basement, but decided to go to the spare bedroom down there. We quickly ran over and then locked ourselves in. I felt much better knowing that the door had a lock on it. Still, I didn't know what exactly was going on. As we were in there, we then heard the sound of somebody coming down the stairs. That's when I got really nervous. We both kept silent and did not move, as we heard someone now walking into the basement. They went into the main room and then sort of started to walk over to us. I was literally holding my breath, as was Dante. About 10 seconds later, the person seemed to walk back towards the stairs and then go back up them. We knew that we needed to call the police. I didn't have a cell phone back then, but Dante did thankfully, and he called 911. We were trying to be very quiet and said that we thought someone had broken into our house. They said help was on the way and to stay put where we were. 911 stayed on the line with us the entire time. I could sort of hear the person walking around upstairs, but just barely. The police arrived very quickly, taking just over 5 minutes, although I will say it was some of the longest 5 minutes of my life. When they got there, they found a man upstairs. Some random guy was in our house. I remember he was claiming that he thought he was at his friend's house and he just had the wrong address. I didn't believe him though. The way he got in was through the back door. It had been left unlocked. Not long after that, my parents got home. That was one of the craziest moments of my life. This happened many years ago. I think I was 12 at the time. I grew up in a nice neighborhood in an old 2-story Victorian house. We lived in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains on a corner of a quiet street. It was a cool area to grow up in, lots of nature to explore, and few fences to stop kids and their dogs from exploring it. I'm the oldest of 4 kids, but my parents didn't think that I was old enough to stay at home and take care of them by myself for a night. So they hired a babysitter to watch us on that night. I had a huge crush on her. She was 17 and gorgeous, so I was okay with the deal. It was just a normal summer night, warm with a bright moon. At the time of this story, it was late, probably around 11 p.m. My brother and sisters had gone to bed already, and I was up reading in my bed while the babysitter was watching TV downstairs. My little brother and I shared a big room on the 2nd floor that looked out over the front yard. I was reading in my bed when suddenly my brother, in a frightened voice, called my name. I thought he was dreaming at first, but then he stood upright in bed and stared out the window. This obviously freaked me out, so I ran over to him. My brother then pointed out what he was looking at and asked me, "Who's that man?" Down in the front yard, about 20 yards away, was a lanky, long-haired man looking up into the sky. His arms were outstretched and he was slowly spinning. Then he started moaning. I immediately started to panic. I jumped up and ran out into the hallway. For once, I was glad that my parents had not put me in charge. Waiting for me in the hallway were my sisters, who had already been woken up by the noise outside. The sitter also came charging up the stairs. She had wide eyes, which made me really scared. Nobody seemed to know what to do, and the sitter wasn't offering any ideas. For some reason, I decided to call our neighbor across the street. He was a true curmudgeon, but he knew us. I figured that he wouldn't be scared. I grabbed the house phone and he answered after a few rings. I asked him if he saw anyone out front. We saw the man in the front lawn, and my neighbor had a clear view from his house. The neighbor was obviously annoyed, but he did go look. A couple of minutes later, he returned to the phone, and he told me that there was nothing there and I needed to go back to bed. Then he hung up. We were in no state to go to bed now, though. I quickly returned to my brother's window and looked again. The big moon lit up the yard pretty good, but I didn't see the man, and I couldn't hear the noises that he had been making anymore either. The sitter was not going back downstairs alone, and nobody else was going to sleep anytime soon. We all agreed that we should go downstairs together then and make sure that all the doors and windows were locked. We crept downstairs and quickly broke into two groups to check all the doors. I was with the sitter to check the front, while my siblings took the back of the house. All went well, locks were secured, and no weirdos were barging into the house. But the sitter wanted me to look outside just one more time. I was still scared. I was thinking of way too many scary movies that I had seen with my friends. But I didn't want to show that I was scared in front of the sitter, who at the time was the woman of my dreams. I figured if I went outside, I'd be the hero and she'd love me. At least that's how my teenage brain worked. So I quietly moved to the front window which faced the front steps of our door. I craned my neck to look out towards the driveway and back towards the lawn where we had seen him before, but I saw nothing. Then, suddenly, he was there, running at full speed towards the window. Half his face was gone, a mess of blood and torn flesh. He had blood all down his shirt and on his shorts. The sitter screamed, and I dropped to the floor in the most unmanly way possible. My siblings were crying in the hallway. The man started pounding on the front door and yelling incoherently. I remember him saying at some point, "Let me in, please." Even that seemed extremely polite for a mass murderer or whatever this guy seemed to be. But there was no way I was going to follow up on that request. Besides, I was frozen in fear on the floor. The most I could muster in a squeaky little boy voice was, "Sir, we can't help you. Please go away." At least I did something, though. Our protector, the sitter, was long gone. She was somewhere else, and the man pounded on the door some more, gave a disappointed and helpless final yelp, and then staggered off into the night. I just laid there for a little while, and after that my siblings and I ran upstairs and huddled together. Soon after, 20 minutes or so, we saw lights and sirens. The sitter had done the reasonable thing when she walked away from us, and she had called 911. They found the bloody man wandering down the street, and our nightmare was over. It turned out that he was a cyclist that went out for a full moon ride on a beautiful summer night, but he didn't see the storm ditch on our corner when he took a tight turn at a high speed, and he slid on his face for at least 20 feet. He eventually came to, but he was so delirious from his injuries and the shock that he was off his rocker. He had been wandering around for a while before any of us knew that he was there. We knew this because we found blood trails crisscrossing the front of the property the next morning. I still feel bad that I didn't help him, but I was just a scared kid. My parents didn't go out without us for a while after that incident. For years I was traumatized coming home at night, and nothing ever came of my infatuation with the babysitter. I don't think I ever saw her again after that. But my brother still loves to mimic what I said that night at the front window when I was lying on the ground so scared and tried to respond to the cyclist outside of our door. This is something that happened back when I was a kid, and I still talk with my sister about it from time to time. So, I was 8 years old and my sister was 13. This was back in like the mid-2000s or so, and there was this library that was less than a mile away from my house. We lived in this neighborhood, and if you took the sidewalk to the end of the street and turned, the library was straight that way pretty much. It only took about 15 minutes to walk there. We would go to the library all the time because it was close and because we liked to rent books and videos. One time my sister asked if I wanted to go with her to the library, and I said yes. It was just us two, so we walked there and then went inside. My sister and I were not really interested in the same types of books. So after getting to the library, like normal, we split up and went in different areas. Whenever it was time to go, my sister would just let me know and then we would leave. The library was fairly large, and I went into the children's section and started looking for good books. To me, a good book would be if it had a lot of cool pictures in it and not that many words. I went to this one spot and was by myself. I started taking some books off the shelf and looking at them one by one. Over time, I remembered that I heard someone else enter the aisle that I was in. I looked over and it was another kid who looked a little older than me, maybe 10 or so. I just remembered that he had sort of blonde hair and he walked right up to me. Then he started bullying me for no reason. I had no idea who the kid was, but he just started making fun of me. He asked what book I was reading, and I don't remember what it was, but I think it was just some typical kid's storybook. When I showed it to him, he laughed and said that that book sucked and I was lame. Then I remember he asked if I even knew how to read, and he said that I looked like I didn't. I told him I could read, and then he started to make fun of how I looked and stuff. I had no idea why this kid just came out of nowhere and started roasting me. It made me feel kind of bad at first, but I also realized that this kid didn't know me at all. I told him to go away, and he did, but before doing so, he said a few more mean things to me. Then I tried to forget about it, and I just went back to looking at books. For the next 10 minutes or so, things were fine. Then, out of nowhere, I felt something hit me in my back. It was a book. I did not know where it had come from. Moments later, another book hit me. I heard laughter coming from sort of behind me and a ways back, and I looked to see the kid standing there and laughing. He had been throwing books at me. Then he threw another one. I tried to catch it, but it hit me in the chest. He laughed at that as well. Now the kid was being violent, and I knew that I needed to get away from him. Sure, I wanted to fight him, but he was older and larger than me, and I knew it probably wouldn't go well. So I got up and I ran out of there and went to find my sister. The kid didn't follow me or anything. My sister was way on the other end of the library, and it was nice to get away from that kid. It felt much more quiet and calm near where my sister was. I told her about the kid. She said she wanted to see who he was, so we went back over there. However, when we got back there, he was gone. After that, I finished picking out the books that I wanted to get, and my sister did as well. So, I would say about 20 minutes later, we were both ready to leave. My sister found me, and we started to head back up to the front to check out our books. However, as we were approaching, we heard the sound of some people yelling. Soon, we got close enough, and I saw the same kid who had been bullying me. He was yelling at one of the librarians. I wasn't sure why, but they were arguing, and then I saw the kid go over to a display and knock it over. Several other people were just standing around and watching. Then I saw a man who I assumed to be the kid's dad go over to him, and the man was also yelling at another librarian. It was a large dispute, and the dad then announced loudly that they were leaving, and then he started cursing loudly and they both walked out. I was shocked at what I had seen, but after thinking about it for a second, I was not surprised at all that the kid acted that way. After that, we checked out our books and left. I'm guessing that the kid had been caught throwing books or being rude to someone or something like that. He was probably asked to leave, and his father didn't seem much better than him. I didn't really make out what specifically the argument was about, but I'm happy to say that after that, I never saw that kid again. I worked at a library for a while when I was younger. It was a local library in the city that I lived in. Things would normally not get too busy, and there would just be one or two of us working most of the time. The library itself was not all that big either. So one time I was working, and there was a coworker with me until about 6 p.m. We closed at 8 p.m., so for the final 2 hours I was by myself. That was not a problem though, because there were hardly any people in the library. Just a few here and there, and they soon left. Things were very quiet by 7:30. There were just a couple of people scattered around. I really didn't have that much to do, and I was behind my desk near the front entrance sort of. At around that point, I remember that I saw a man approaching me. I thought that he was going to check some books out, but instead, he told me that there were some books that were out of order. I didn't really know what he was talking about at first. The man said that some books were completely on the wrong shelves and stuff, and that it was disgraceful. I asked him to show me, and I got out from behind my desk and started following the man. He started walking deeper into the library, and soon we were near the far back corner. We went past a few bookshelves to the very last ones. The man said it was right there. I started looking at the large bookshelf and all the books on it. I was trying to find which ones were out of place. In the first few seconds that I was searching, I didn't see anything. The place I was in the library, like I said, was sort of a far back, secluded corner. There was an emergency exit door there as well. Seconds into looking, and out of nowhere, I remember hearing the door open behind me. I was so confused, because obviously it was not a normal exit or entrance. Right as I turned around though, the next thing I knew, these two men were grabbing me. One of them was the guy who had led me there, and the other had come from outside. They started pulling me towards the door to go outside. I just started struggling like crazy. I was desperately trying to get away from the men. It was 2 against 1 though, so they had a big advantage. Plus, they were both larger than me. Now, they didn't punch me or kick me or anything, but they were just grabbing on me and trying to push me and drag me out the door. I tried yelling, and one of the guys tried to cover my mouth. I was able to get out some yells. However, I'm not sure if anyone else was around the library to even hear. We continued to struggle for what felt like a really long time. There wasn't really much talking going on, just mostly struggling. They were slowly getting me closer and closer to the doorway. I remember I got close to the wall right by the door, and at that point, I noticed the fire alarm. I was able to pull it, and the alarm went off like crazy. When that happened, one of the men tried to put it back and stop it, which allowed me to sort of get away more. I made it a few feet away before the guy grabbed me again. I continued to struggle with them for about another 30 seconds to a minute, I would guess. Then they both just let go of me and went out the door. As soon as they were gone, I saw that the door was propped open and it didn't shut. So I made sure that it closed, and then I called the police. They didn't take long to arrive, and when they got there, I told them everything I could. We didn't have many security cameras, but we did have a few, and I turned them over to the police. After that happened, I continued to work at the library, but I did not close by myself again after that. I never saw those men again either, and I don't really remember how they looked either. I just hope that I never see them again, and I hope that they're caught.
I had this whole day off. It was cold and wet outside, as it had been raining off and on all day. I stayed in and played video games, going about my day as I normally would. Around 5, the rain had picked up, and there was a bit of lightning in the distance. I cooked up some dinner, then decided to watch a horror movie, while I had the fitting ambience of the storm outside. I shut off the lights and spent the next 2 hours on the couch. The storm definitely got worse over that time. There weren't any outages or anything, but it was just really coming down hard outside, with heavy lightning strikes nearby. It was around 10 o'clock. I wasn't really tired or ready for bed yet, but I got up to stretch my legs and refill my water. When I turned around toward the hallway, I immediately saw something move, like a shadow on the wall. It was quick, just a split second, too short for me to really understand what I saw, or even be sure that what I saw was real. I froze in place for a moment, then walked over and looked around, only to find nothing but an empty hallway. Maybe it was a flicker of light coming through the window from a far-off lightning strike. I also just got finished with the horror movie, so I could have been a little on edge and just seeing things. I honestly chalked it up to nothing and forgot about it after less than a minute. I refilled my water and checked on the storm going on outside. The trees were blowing around like crazy, and the rain was basically flooding the roads. We didn't get many big storms like this around here, so it was always interesting when we did. Our town definitely wasn't built for them. I went back to the couch and turned on YouTube to try and ease myself into getting sleepy. I wasn't too tuned in to what I was watching. I guess I was kind of spacing out or whatever. But then again, I saw a shadow on the wall behind the TV move. It was like something behind me just peeked around the corner for a split second. I jolted my head around and looked at the opening to the living room. Nothing was there. I got up and walked over, looking all around that area, but I saw nothing at all. I didn't know what the hell was going on. It was like I was just seeing things, but I never had it happen twice like that before. Was I just sleepy? I didn't feel like it. I thought that the horror movie and the storm outside would make for a chill night, but this was far from it now. I still thought it was nothing, but there was that tiny feeling in the back of my mind that it wasn't nothing. I spent another 15 minutes on the couch, but decided to go to bed afterward. I shut off the TV and headed upstairs. I still wasn't tired, and even less so after everything happening, so I hopped in the shower to relax myself before getting in bed. I turned on the water and tried to calm down. I was in there for maybe 5 minutes. Through the water, a sudden thud rang through the house. It was violent and loud, vibrating through the floors. My whole body shivered as I shut off the water and quickly got dressed. With the water off, the house was quiet now, not even the slightest sound. I felt like my ears were ringing just from the disturbing silence that followed the thud. I slowly made my way into the hallway and then down the stairs. I walked through the living room and then the kitchen. The back door was barely hanging on from the top hinge, completely open, and splinters of wood covered the floor under it. The 2 other hinges looked like they were ripped out of the wooden doorway. I ran up to my room and called 911, locking myself in the bathroom. That whole time I waited, I thought I was trapped inside my home with someone, but when the cops arrived, we quickly realized that wasn't the case. The door wasn't ripped off the hinges from the outside, it was from the inside. It was like someone angrily left, swinging the door open so hard that it slammed back into the wall and ripped the screws out of the doorway. Whoever it was had been inside my house that whole night. Likely the shadows I saw were them inside my home, probably moving as soon as I looked at them. I have no idea how long they were there for, or what they were doing in my home, watching me for. It's also really strange that they destroyed my door like that, like they were frustrated. I've never slept well in this house since then.
I live with my wife in a 2-story home, and we've been living here for almost 5 years now. I will never forget the scary thing that happened last year, though. The day had been pretty normal. My wife and I had both gone to work, and had been gone for most of it. We got back home and had a pretty normal night as well. When it was time to go to bed, we both went upstairs where our bedroom is. I remember that after getting into bed, my wife forgot something downstairs. I don't remember what, but she told me that she would be right back. By this point, all the lights in the house had been turned off. The next thing I knew, like a minute later, I heard my wife running back up the stairs really fast. She came into the bedroom with a scared look on her face. Then she told me that she thought she saw a man downstairs in the kitchen. I honestly didn't believe her at first. I mean, she hadn't turned on any of the lights. There was a little bit of light that would come in through a few windows so you could sort of see, but it was still very dark. I didn't know why she would think that she saw a man though. It just seemed so crazy to me. I told her that I would go downstairs and look around. She told me to be careful, but I was feeling confident. I left the bedroom, went down the hallway, and then walked down the stairs. Now, I'm not sure why I didn't turn the lights on as I went, but I didn't. When I finally got downstairs, at first I didn't see anybody and I didn't hear anything either. I walked over to the kitchen thinking that I was just going to confirm that nobody was around or anything like that. But when I approached the kitchen, I thought I heard a noise. It sounded like it was coming from the basement area. There was a door that was usually shut in the kitchen that led to the basement. I finally turned on a light and looked to the door. It was still closed, but I thought I heard somebody now at the bottom of the stairs in the basement. Now I was starting to believe that my wife might have actually seen somebody. I carefully went over to the basement door, now feeling kind of nervous. I opened it up, and it was very dark down there with no lights on. I hit the light switch, which was really just a dim bulb at the bottom of the staircase. This didn't provide too much light, but of what it did, I couldn't see anybody. I called out asking if anybody was down there, I don't know why, and of course I did not get a response, so then I decided to go downstairs. At this point, I wasn't hearing any kind of noises at all. I slowly went down one step at a time, looking around. When I had made it about halfway down the stairs though, I heard another sound. This one sort of sounded like it was coming from behind me, which was really strange. Then I realized that it was coming from under the stairs. Like many basements, ours was mostly for storage and was somewhat cluttered. There was some junk next to the stairs and underneath the stairs, which would have been a really good hiding place. As I looked to the side of the stairs, I was sure that someone was hiding under there. I did not panic and slowly walked back up. Then I left the basement, shut the door behind me, and then took out my phone and called the police. After that, I went back upstairs to our bedroom with my wife, and I told her about the guy that was under the stairs. I locked the door to the bedroom, and then we waited for the cops to get there. In the time of waiting, we did not hear anything else. I was nervous that the guy would come upstairs to our bedroom or something like that, but he did not. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. They came inside and searched the basement. There, they found a man hiding behind the stairs, just like I had heard. The crazy thing is we don't know when or how he entered our house. We never really used the basement much and hadn't been down there in days, and there was no signs of forced entry like a broken window or something. He could have maybe snuck in at some point while we were outside, or maybe one of us forgot to lock a door. I still don't know.
I was staying at my friend's place for the weekend. She was away on a trip with her family, but she had a small cat that was afraid of thunderstorms, and this weekend we were supposed to get a really bad storm. Her cat was very independent though, usually just sitting alone in whichever room she felt like. It started storming the day before my friend left, and it continued throughout the whole weekend. This was on Saturday. I had spent the night there with no issues at all. Her cat, Molly, did fine with the storm. That morning, I enjoyed relaxing on her comfy couch and reading. I always loved staying at my friend's place because it was out in the woods. It felt so isolated and peaceful. Midway through the day, though, a call came in on the home phone. This was back when those were a common thing. I checked in case it was her trying to reach me, but it said unknown number, so I didn't answer. But a few minutes later, a call came through again. It said the same thing, unknown number. It rang out, but this time a voice came through on the answering machine. It was a quiet, male voice. They just said one word, my friend's name, as if asking if she could hear him. He then hung up after a couple seconds of silence. I didn't know if this was someone she was talking to, or like a family member or something, so I just texted her to let her know that someone called the home phone. I did find it strange that it came up as an unknown caller though. Over the next 3 hours, 2 more calls came in from that same number, but no more voice messages. My friend never responded either. I guess they were pretty busy. I didn't worry myself about it though. I figured it was nothing. I made food and really spent the rest of the day not doing much of anything. Later, say around 8 or 9, I found a movie to watch upstairs in the bedroom. I got about halfway through it before remembering to check on Molly and make sure she had food and water. I went downstairs, but was confused to see her standing right at the front door, staring at the crack in the doorway, like she was waiting for it to open. I called her name, and she looked at me, but only for a moment before looking back at the door. It kind of creeped me out, if I'm being honest. I walked up to the door and hesitantly looked out the peephole at the porch. The glass had fogged up from all the rain, so everything was blurry and I couldn't really make out anything. But then something moved, enough for me to tell there was something, or someone, standing on the other side of the porch. I felt a little unsettled, but I continued to watch, trying to get a clearer view of what I was seeing. I really wanted to know for sure if there was someone out there, but I also didn't want to open the door if there was someone there. 2 to 3 minutes went by without any changes in what I could see. I thought I was just scaring myself for no reason. After all, if someone was out there, they would have knocked on the door by now. I left the door to go check on Molly's food and water, and grab myself some snacks for the movie. When I passed by the door again, Molly wasn't there anymore. I looked out just to double check, and something looked different. It was still fogged up and blurry, but one of the shapes I saw wasn't there anymore, like it just disappeared. Was there really someone standing there the whole time? Feeling off about everything, I picked Molly up and brought her to the bedroom with me. I turned the movie back on and sat on the bed. The whole time the movie was playing, I couldn't shake a really unsettling feeling I had. 30 minutes went by, when suddenly Molly jumped off the bed and walked up to the bedroom door. She didn't scratch at it or look back at me like she wanted to go out. She just stared at the crack in the doorway, exactly the same as she did at the front door, like someone was out there. My heart immediately started racing. I called her name in a shaky voice, but her focus was locked on the door. I got up from the bed and quietly walked over, then leaned my ear against the door. I couldn't hear anything. I then crouched down and peered under the crack between the floor. My whole body aggressively shot back. There was someone standing right outside the door, just a couple inches away. My eyes immediately looked at the doorknob. I had never even locked it. I snapped the lock down, and almost right away, the person on the other side ran away from the door. They went downstairs, where I could no longer hear anything. I called 911, then called my friend. By the time cops got there, the house was empty and nobody was around. With all the information, it seemed that the intruder was likely a stalker, probably the same one who kept calling. So they tried to trace the phone number, but had no luck. It was pretty much left at that. I feel bad for my friend because whoever that man was, he was definitely stalking her and not me. I don't know if it was just a coincidence that they showed up during the weekend she was gone, or if they were trying to break into what they thought would be an empty home. After all, I never answered the phone, so they probably were confident the house was empty. Maybe they were planning to wait and catch her off guard when she eventually got back from vacation. We never found out who they were or what they were doing. I was working DoorDash this night. It was pretty late, like 12 or 1 a.m. I was used to staying up, so doing these late night deliveries was kind of normal for me. This night was slow. I was driving around and just listening to music while waiting for any orders to come through. When one finally did, I barely even looked at the details before accepting it, since I didn't have much options anyway. I drove up to the 24/7 McDonald's and picked up their order, then had the app set me on course for the drop-off location. It was 15 minutes from me. The whole drive was quiet. The roads were still, and I didn't really have any thoughts. I was just going through the motions. When I was a minute from arriving, it had me turn into I don't know what to call it. I guess it was a business area, but it didn't look like a regular one. Usually these places with a bunch of business buildings were nice, like well landscaped and taken care of, but this place wasn't. Most of the buildings looked old and unused, and the grass and bushes around them were overgrown and untrimmed. It was strange. The map had me turn into a parking lot where a small office building was. It looked like it was only one story, It was just as old and out of shape as the other places. I had done deliveries to office buildings before, or people at work, so this was nothing out of the ordinary, really. It was just the strange nature of this area that had me put off. The map had me pull into what looked like the back of the building, though it was kind of hard to tell. I looked at the directions to see if maybe there was more info, but then a message popped up from the customer. They said they saw me pull in and to bring it up to the gray metal door on my side of the building. I said alright and pulled up next to the building, then got out with the bag. As I walked up to it, I could tell this was definitely the back of the office. There was no main door, it was just a bunch of random doors, like a fire exit door and a bunch of back access doors. I found the one they were talking about though. It was a gray metal door with no windows or markings or anything. As I approached it, my phone got another message. He just said to bring it right inside for him. I kinda just shrugged it off and did as he said, not thinking too hard about it. I opened the door and stepped in. It was a hallway, but the main lights weren't on. It was just what I guess were the low energy lights. Small, dim light bulbs spread out down the hallway. Honestly, I was expecting some sort of room, or like a counter or something, that would be an obvious place for me to put the food. Was I supposed to just walk further into the building, or was he gonna meet me here? I pulled my phone back out to text him when I heard a click behind me. I turned and looked at the door. I pulled on the handle, but it was stuck. Someone just locked me in. All the blood rushed from my face. What did I just get myself into? I dropped the bag and tried harder to open the door, but it didn't budge at all. My only option was to go further down the hallway and hope I could find another way out before whoever was out there finds their way to me. Just as I started making my way down the hallway, I heard a door open and close from somewhere on the other side of the building. I hurried, running to the end and finding another door. When I opened it, there was another dimly lit hallway with a bunch of rooms on either side. I went in, but immediately heard something from the other end, so I made a split-second decision and slipped into one of the office rooms and hid. A few seconds later, footsteps came rushing through the hall and right up to the door to the hallway I just came from. They went in, running down toward the locked door. I made a run for it, going the direction the person came from and hoping to find the exit. Thankfully, I did. I ran back out to my car and drove out of there. Unfortunately, I don't think the officer on the phone understood the situation fully because they didn't get an officer there for 20 minutes. Nobody was there by then. However, I was informed that the office building was not in service at the moment, or hadn't been for the last 5 or so years. It was like partially abandoned, I guess. No cameras or anything. What exactly would have happened if I hadn't been quick enough to leave that hallway? Who knows? Definitely won't let myself get in a situation like that again though.